What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with a very special guest. It's that time of the calendar where you're going to be getting 3-4 episodes in a week from Mr. Mort Jensen and myself. He is of the NBA podcast fame, Yahoo Sports fame, Forbes fame. Where else are you famous from? You're famous international fame. Got all those international listeners for you.
Well, I mean, look, you even forgot about Sports Illustrated because I am everywhere. I'm omnipresent. No, look, way too kind as always. Way too kind of an introduction, Dan. How are you, sir? That's the most important thing. How are you doing?
I'm caffeinating. That's how I'm doing. So I'm doing spectacular as I hold it
Nice.
up on screen. Zero
Nice.
complaints on my end. You undersell yourself as always. I don't know how people do. I don't know how people do anything when they have for like families to be responsible for. I'm a terrible dog dad / husband. When you throw kids in the equation, I have all the respect in the world for people who balance work in that. And then when you factor in the fucking time difference for you specifically, I think I got it bad on the East Coast. I like to tell Grant that all the time. So all the respect in the world for you, and you undersell yourself as always. You are amazing. And I'm excited to talk to you about, look, Eastern Conference fringe playoff teams that will be who we think are the most dangerous. Spoiler alert, there'll be a Western Conference version of this coming out very, very soon. But I thought we talked about contenders, Grant and I, recently. And it's funny, one of the contenders is actually on our East fringe list. But the playoff races are fascinating, not just because we're still dealing with the play-in stuff, but the margins. Like, doesn't it feel to you when you're looking at the tippy top of the league, there might just be 3 or 4 teams that belong in a tier 1 and tier 2, and then there's just like this massive ass cluster throughout the rest of the league. Even if you want to tier it, there might just be like 2 then separate tiers from there where so many different things could happen. And look, the West, I think, is normally associated with that discussion, but you're looking at the East, and as we record this, it's just like, okay, what separates the Magic, who are the 4 seed, from the Sixers, who are currently outside the play-in? It's 4 losses. That's not a lot at all.
Now, I feel this way every single year, honestly, and this is probably where the play-in tournament has come in and had an effect, right? Because now you're looking at the lower ends of the standings. You're not just looking 1 through 8, you're looking 1 through 10. And so you're automatically in your head, like tiering it differently. Like I was probably a little bit of a skeptic initially. Like I was excited, but I was also like in the back of my mind, like, is this going to work? Is this going to be a thing? But we've already seen, like, it hasn't been going on for that many years. Like, what is this? Is this the 5th year with the play-in? Somewhere along this. Right. Yeah, right? Like 4th or 5th. And we've already had a play-in team like make the finals. We already had like another play-in team make the conference finals in the Lakers, I believe. So like we're seeing the unpredictability of it all. And I think that's awesome. And it also makes it so much harder for me, honestly, to like legitimately tier teams, because I always have this thing in the back of my mind going, oh yeah, I might like this team, but they might get their shit kicked out of them by the Heat, who are like 10th. Like I don't know. And I love the fact that it's so unpredictable. It turns out, Dan, that the NBA is actually good. Did you know that?
Let's not get into that. By the way, this is year 6. This will be the playoff number 6. That's wild, right? Because 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24. So yeah, this will be number 6. Not wild.
Time moves so fast, man. Oh, I will say this though: the COVID years, it did feel like 3 seasons were just slapped together.
Right.
Like I don't even remember like the distinction of it. I can't like separate seasons from that time where someone would said, "Remember that game?" I'm like, that could have happened in 3 different seasons. I have no idea.
I remember where I was and what I was doing when the league shut down. And then I feel like the next thing I actually remember is that, it was 4 years later and things have gone.
No, it's totally true. Like I remember Mark Cuban's reaction looking into his phone and then blank. And suddenly, like I wake up 4 years later.
Mort, we begin alphabetically with your Atlanta Hawks. I'm just going to assign them. I'm going to assign every single team here for you. How are you feeling about these Hawkies?
They're feisty. I've always loved that word, and sometimes I don't think it's being used the right way, but for this team, I think it's just perfect, like chef's kiss. This is a team where I was like coming into the season, the Spurs have their draft pick unprotected. I was like, oh, what kind of direction are they going in? Are they going to lean vets instead of like youth movement? What are they going to do? Turns out they decided for the better or worse, that they're going to have one foot in each camp of those. Like they're developing Zachary Ricochet. They're still leaning in on Trae Young. Jalen Johnson is probably, in my opinion, the best Hawk. Like right now, I think the way that he's playing is phenomenal. And I think there's room for growth there. Dyson Daniels coming out of nowhere. I don't want to say save their ass because I think that's a little too aggressive, but he gave them such a lift. The story to me, though, is DeAndre Hunter. Remember how everyone is like, oh, he's overpaid. He's just a wing. And then this year he just
that
popped.
sentiment's still out there. I hear him just bandied about in trade rumors, just like, oh, if the Hawks want to get out of that contract. I'm like, maybe a year ago, right? I'm like,
right.
No.
No way. No way. Like, look, here, I don't remember do you have to like reach a certain criteria with games played to win six man? It's so weird. Like some awards are like the 65 game threshold and some are not. Is the six man included in that?
One of them isn't. I think it's the sixth man that might not be included because MIP is definitely included. Otherwise, Jalen Johnson may have won it last year if the game's minimum.
Yeah. And by the way, I want that. I want my roses for that one because I called that before the preseason last year. And Brian was like, and then he was so close.
History will remember it as Brian being right, though, because he didn't win. So sucks for you.
That actually hurts. That literally and physically hurts. No, so even if DeAndre Hunter like misses time later in the season, knock on wood that he doesn't, and it like falls below the 65 game threshold, I would probably have him as my six man this year. I mean, he's just been so phenomenal.
He fits that criteria to like almost to a T. Actually, I think a lot of people, and sometimes I gravitate this is you want someone who comes off the bench, but also may or definitely closes for their team. And so when you get to a Peyton Pritchard, who I think is all there's a ton of candidates, deserving candidates. DeAndre Hunter is going to check that box over a Peyton Pritchard or even a Nickeil Alexander-Walker in Minnesota.
Yep, totally agree. And so I think these Hawks have found something. And look, this isn't important by any means, but I love the fact that they're entertaining to watch. Like this could have been a season where, you know, they were trying to figure themselves out and things just got like bogged down in details. They are out running, they're gunning, they're playing a fun brand of basketball. Like I've made them appointment viewing. I think they've really approached this the right way. The fact that they're basically saying, look, that's the lost cost of this, you know, the pick that's going to San Antonio. We're not going to focus on that. We're going to try to play our best ball and we're going to try to develop guys. I love it. Like where to put them in a playoff bracket though. That's probably why we're having this discussion. And I'm coming in here with virtually nothing to offer because I don't know the answer to that. I have no idea where to put them. They're a 500 team as of recording. And that feels pretty like on brand when you watch them play. But a 500 team in the East can make a lot of noise.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I've been a pretty, I wouldn't say big, but strong advocate of they should see what they can add to this team as we look ahead to the deadline, in part because of those pick commitments.
I want them to be buyers.
Well, I mean, look at because as of right now, the defense is, I think it can be better for stretches than you would expect, but it's slipped again. And they're dead last in opponent 3-point attempt rate and percentage since December 1st. They are much better when their defense is set, but part of that is their offense has not really been good enough. Like there are lineups where it works, and a big part of that is I still think Trae Young is one of the best passers alive. I still think he is by far the best player on this team. But when he's not shooting at his usual clip from a bunch of different spots, and then you compound that with Bogdanovic's injuries and lack of availability, and then by extension, that dearth of creation outside of Trae and Jalen Johnson right now, their dynamic is great together. And I think that Jalen Johnson is much better in a vacuum. He continues to just create for others a lot better. I think 2 years ago, 18 months ago, I probably would have been, this is someone who can only do that in the open floor. And it's no, he's continuing to do it more from dead stops. He's drawing two to the ball. It feels like more. He's even just, you know, I think these past 2 years have proved that he's like one of the better lob passers in the league too. But your offense is in the 15th percentile when Trae Young is off the floor. And when you look at just the teammates, there's not a lot of off or on ball gravity, like relative to Trae Young. And then even just off ball, there's not a ton of gravity like from Jalen Johnson. Sure, Bogdanovich, even though he hasn't been shooting as well this year. And so I look at them and they still feel like they epitomize mediocrity, but I feel like they're so close to being
Yep.
something more that I'm not saying, hey, go throw all those picks and get Jimmy Butler. Although I have been an advocate for them trying something like that if they get to keep Dyson Daniels, Zachary Risachet. I also have to acknowledge, though, what they're trying to do is plumb the depths of Dyson Daniels and Zachary Risachet. But if you can go out and get maybe something that you think is going to upgrade your backup point guard rotation or just deliver more offensive gravity in the half court, that's probably the way to go. I think some people might point towards the front court as well. But at this point,
Yep.
I'm kind of like, just letting Clint Capella come off the books, and you have Onyeka Okongwu. And if you need Larry Nance Jr. as matching salary, or if you need Capella as matching salary, sure. But I think I kind of identify them as they could be a backup point guard or just a better tertiary offensive option away from just being in the top 6 mix more firmly.
I'm glad you brought up Onyeka because I'm a big proponent of his. Like, I love him, and for a long while I was like, look, just turn him into the starting center. It's fine. Like, unleash him, give him that nod. And John Hollinger and I, we kid each other once in a while, and we DM, and he was like, he was skeptical, and I was like, every time Onyeka had a good game, I would poke him. And he would just like tell me in a nice way, Mort, have you even noticed the size has returned to the NBA? And it's like, that's a fair point. Like, Onyeka is 6'8", like, he plays taller than he is. I'll give him that. He's super active, great rebounder, utterly elite at finishing around the basket too. But 6'8", if these Hawks are going to be a legitimate playoff team and try to go for something, maybe not this year, but next year, they're going to need that size. Like, I know you can offset some of the size with Ricochet and Johnson at playing the forwards, but I do think you're going to need a bigger center, like, in the middle. I do think you're going to need someone, and he's like the perfect, third big too. Like, someone who can come in and play like 25, 28 minutes per game. It's an interesting dynamic, I want to say. I'm not sure I'm there with the Jimmy Butler idea, though. Like, that feels a little too aggressive.
Well, if it's not going to cost like a ton of first round equity, and it's if it costs you one pick, and they have the Lakers pick this year, they have the Kings pick that's protected through I think 2027.
Protected pick, I'm all in. That's fine. I'll
I mean, even if it's the Lakers pick, that's unprotected. But I guess the Lakers could be like, you wouldn't give up salaries plus that pick to get to Jimmy Butler while you're keeping, Dyson Daniels.
I mean, look, you're asking the wrong guy. I just wrote an article over at Yahoo where I did have a Jimmy Butler trade, and like, I more or less wrapped up that segment where I was like, look, if this team, I'm not going to say which team, you can go in and click and find out, wants to add, a second or two, that's fine. Just don't get into the first round equity stuff on this one.
But so I would ask you one,
right?
Given, let's say Bogdanovich is more available and better for the rest of the year, do you think that, what would you view as the bigger need then? If you're thinking that they might need, because the way you're describing the Okongwu dynamic would be, well, they could use someone who's an upgrade from Capella then in the rotation. What do you view as more pressing if we assume better health, availability, and shot making from Bogdanovich?
No, I agree with you then. If we're prioritizing needs, I think you nailed it. I do think they need more creation. I love Trey as a creator, love Jalen Johnson as a creator. Don't love Dyson Daniels as a creator, at least not yet. Still very, very young. Same goes for Ricochet. If those two take leaps in coming years, oh my God, this team is going to be very, very exciting for a long time. But you're right. As of right now, heading into the second half of this season, 2024, 2025, you're right. They're probably one creator short. The question for me is, and I honestly think it's a good question, should they be in a rush? Should they be in a hurry? Or should they just basically take this season at face value and say, look, as long as we make the playoffs, then the worst we can give the Spurs is like the 14th selection, the 15th, right? And then our obligation to them for this year, at least, is over. Then we can go in and focus on, getting better for next year.
And I kind of look at it as, I wonder if they need a little nudge to ensure that they, like, because if they have to go in by virtue of the play-in, like, I think you could make a case, and we're going to talk about one of these teams shortly, that the 6 spots in the East just might be kind of sewn up when you look at the Cavs, Celtics, Knicks, Magic, Pacers, and Bucks. I don't know which team you're going to view as the most fragile from that sort of, like, cadre of teams. And so with the Hawks, I'm kind of like, I'm not telling them they need to make a home run swing, but
Right.
if you could I'm also wondering like what level of creation do you want? Do you want more of just this half court pick and roll tactician? Or if you get someone who spaces the floor off the ball and do a little bit on the ball, maybe as a driver, does that open things up for Dyson Daniels as a playmaker more? Because like the off ball gravity on this team right now is a problem. A name I thought about, it just feels a little too high end if they're looking to kind of straddle to like Colin Sexton would be really good for this team. He's not like a caps lock creator for others, but he can get downhill. And if you're looking for someone to kind of dot the arc around Jalen Johnson and Dyson Daniels more, that would be something that could unlock units for them. I'm not giving up a first round pick if I'm the Hawks for Colin Sexton. If I'm Utah, given this stash of picks that I have, I'm not giving up Colin Sexton unless I get a really good offer.
I like that idea of Colin. So I interviewed him a couple years back, no more than a couple years, probably prior to the pandemic, honestly. And I was actually asking him about the point guard role because, I basically told him, we all look at you as a scorer. That is the role you've been given. And he was like, yeah, that is the role I've given because that's what I'm best at doing. And then he started going through how he saw the floor, especially in transition. And like, there's a part of me that wants to explore that. I do think he's got another level. I think teams have just kind of leaned into him as a scorer because that is by far his best skill. I would be down with that. Someone who can just get you buckets, but also just get into an individual flow off the bench. I don't hate that. I think that's an interesting 3-guard rotation at the very least. It'll be small because Colin Sexton is like 6'1". Yeah, like he's super small. So him and Trey would be, it'd be a small backcourt when they shared it. But then you look, if you have Ricochet and you have Jalen Johnson on the floor, like the wings kind of offset it a little bit.
Yeah. And I think at the end, we can ask like, which of these teams do we think is like the closest right now to being dangerous this season will be a good way to wrap that up, which means it's time more to move on to your Chicago Bulls, who should not be in this discussion. I want to make that there's no reason we should be talking about the Bulls through this lens in the middle of January. It angers me to my very core. And yet, here we are.
Your Chicago Bulls. My God, I haven't podcasted with Brian for like half a year, and I thought I'd finally gotten rid of that. And then now you're there, just picking up that responsibility. No, it's not my Chicago Bulls, Dan. It hasn't been for a while. But I will say this: it's going to sound like I'm a Bulls fan right now because I want to stand in front of the fire of Zach LaVine here. People who are just constantly blaming him for A, B, and C, and oh, he's nothing but a bad contract. He's this, and that. Look, man, this guy is sporting a true shooting percentage in the mid 60s. He's hitting 45% from 3 on over 7 attempts per game. He's hitting like 52% from the field. He is ridiculously efficient, has been for years. People love to point to last season when he was injured, when he only played 25 games and was like, oh, look, see, he can't stay on the floor. Whereas before that, it was perfectly reasonable. I think he played like 73% of games since then, which for the NBA standards nowadays is totally fine. He should not be viewed as some sort of toxic contract. I think it's getting utterly ridiculous. You can't tell me that this guy wouldn't help, I don't know, the Denver Nuggets or someone else. Like, there are good teams out there that would stand to benefit greatly from trading for Zach LaVine, especially knowing that the Bulls, because of this last year and a half of trade rumors and whatnot, they're not going to get like a Gobert package for him, not even close. Like, you can get him for pretty cheap. And like, then people will say, well, what about the contract? Who cares if you win the trade, and like lopsidedly so? It's fine. Like, I'm not even focusing on the Bulls right now. I'm just focusing on Zach LaVine landing in a place where he gets a chance to win, because I just think he's been stuck on the league's most mediocre team in potentially history. And I feel bad for him. Like, save Zach LaVine is kind of my mantra here.
Yeah, he's been a monster. And even in their most recent game against the Kings that they lost, he was just absolutely huge. And I think you could still question some of his decision making.
Yeah.
Where it feels like he's ignoring teammates, but I don't necessarily blame him all the times. Like, but I like looking, but this team specifically, like, I want to talk about the actual Bulls. Zach LaVine's been great. Vooch is having the most efficient season of his career still. And it's like he's cooled off a little bit, but like since December 1st, 38% from 3 on nearly five attempts per game. Have we reached a point where based off what you would get for these guys, because you're mentioning, I could make the case too for that. I don't understand why, when it comes to Bradley Beal, I think if you put Bradley Beal in a different role and you can like have him do more things on the ball, run more DHOs with him, he'll actually be good. He won't be worth his contract and he'll be good. You don't trade for him, even if it's a very low cost, because of the no trade clause more than anything. It's a lot of money, and then he has power over when and how he leaves. But with someone like Zach LaVine, it's sort of like, okay, like why don't the Spurs just cobble together some contracts that they don't want? And like Zach Collins is just money they shouldn't have on their books. You're almost halfway there at that point. So then you have to figure out the other money.
Did you listen to my Danish podcast that I recorded today? Because that is funny. I actually brought up a Zach LaVine to Spurs scenario.
I did not listen to it, but I am fluent in
Danish.
Yeah. So don't worry. Rest assured, I'll listen to it.
No, that's funny. I look. I'll tell you this though. You are sending the wrong guys to San Antonio, and I've been talking about this for, I want to say 6 months or so. This isn't the deal. The deal is Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu.
Well, we talked about that.
I have, and I'm going to reiterate myself here because that's a good one. I still like that trade.
I don't disagree with you in a vacuum, but the Bulls specifically, like, what do you make of this team? Because relative to what they're going to get back now for Zach LaVine or a Vooch, you could almost understand why they wouldn't. So, like, in theory, why are you trading Nikola Vucevic for a second-round pick and salary just to get off the final year of his deal, assuming that you do, and this might be the bigger point, to keep the pick that you owe to the San Antonio Spurs that is top 10 protected. And right now, they might just barely keep that. It's sort of billowing in the wind. Do you view what this team is doing as, one, they don't need to make a trade to ensure they keep that pick because they still kind of have, we'll shut down player X in their back pocket? But is it also kind of an issue of, all right, well, have you seen enough from the players they might want around long term to say, like, well, they can kind of juggle those two things, and that you don't need to make some of these moves to, one, better position yourself for the future, but maybe get even more information than you already have off Modest Buzelis, whose role, after being non-existent, now I'd say it's like more of a moderate role for this team. Just where are you sort of like at with the Bulls as currently constructed and their overall direction?
Yeah, I would not trust them to, like, basically say, oh, we can always move guys in and out of the lineup later in the year to lose. I wouldn't trust that at all, because they changed their shot profile this year. It's kind of, this is so typical Bulls. Like, the fan base have spent years clamoring for a change shot profile and like more threes, more efficiency. They finally do it this year, and they're actually fun to watch as a direct result. I know I had them super low on my league pass rankings. I think I had them like 28th or something.
Deservedly so, as far as I'm concerned.
But like, I actually find them interesting to watch this year because they're playing an up and down brand of basketball. They're fun to watch. It's just the weirdest timing to do it, because the need for a rebuild, I think you and I both agree on this. Like, it's been there for a while now. Like, we can sit here and talk about, why is there an argument that they shouldn't? No, like, let's get that out of the way first and foremost. There is no real argument for the Bulls not blowing this to smithereens. There's no argument for it. Like, I understand what you're saying though. Like, given the current construct, given that they want to win, is there any reason for it? And no, through that perspective, no. That said, of course, this team isn't going anywhere. The more concerning bit is that Billy Donovan signed a contract extension. He has been on record for saying he does not want to be attached to a rebuilding team, which suggests, to your point, Dan, that they're not going to rebuild, that they're not going to flip, major pieces right now, just to say
part of that. And maybe this is me. If I wanted to play devil's advocate of, you're saying there's no case to keeping it together. When you only have, I'll throw Buzelis and Giddey, and then there's like Kobe White is kind of your maybe blue chip cornerstone options.
Well, no, because the 140% rule is right there. You can't.
Well, I agree with you there, but my point being, like, that's also, if they're going to trade Kobe White, like, none of these players, for Kobe White, I think they get 2 first-round picks. But I think a big thing, I don't know if front offices, teams spend too much time thinking about this, but the optics of not having that clear pole star after, I commend Sean Marks has now done this like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Because you hit reset without having that primary cornerstone in place, and you figure it out as you go. I really do think teams,
Ben Simmons slander. Okay, fair enough.
I think teams are more reluctant to do that. And with the Bulls, it's even if you just move Vooch and LaVine for whatever, and maybe see what you get for some of the other guys on the roster, it's like they almost feel like they're obligated to keep Kobe White because he's the closest they come to that. And look, Kobe White is really good. He's still like his efficiency's down a tick this year, but he's scoring at a faster clip while playing fewer minutes. I know he's dealing with the eye injury at the moment. They're fascinating to me because they are. When I was saying that they're unwatchable, I was talking about the preseason. They have been mostly a pleasant watch this year. And even look, when you have Zach LaVine and like what Vooch has been doing, a lot of the appeal of them is like when they get up and down, but like their half court offense is 10th since December 1st. Like this is a competent offensive team. I just don't, when we're talking about this, like this is not a team I'm going to consider as which of these teams is the most dangerous or can make the most noise this year. Of all the teams that we're going to talk about, they are literally the only ones that if they make a trade to add to this is inexcusable, unforgivable, and deserve to be trashed for it. And I guess that's the definition of no man's land. They're better than expected, but not meaningfully enough to change their trajectory. And yet, if you're trading the players we're talking about, there's only one that I think gives you a bunch of value when you look at it through the lens of draft equity. And I also don't think fans are conditioned to grade trades through interpret trades through that, which is fine. But like some of the biggest criticisms I get with my trades or when I'm reacting to trades is they didn't get any players back, or look at what salary is going. And it's, well, look at the draft picks they're getting. I think the Bulls kind of manage their fans, to be clear, I think would have managed a better team at this point. I'm not saying Bulls fans are opposed to a rebuild. I don't think this team has the stomach to go that route to where maybe they'll trade Vooch. I'm almost at the point where I don't think they're going to trade Zach LaVine.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, look, that is, I think was that Casey Johnson? Someone covering the Bulls, might have actually been Will Gottlieb. I don't remember. Someone said that they could see the Bulls trade one guy and as to not create too much turnover right off the bat because they move slow. This is a team that has gone through years and years without trades, for example, beforehand. Like this is a team that's way too patient for their own good. So it is sort of a dream scenario for a lot of Bulls fans that both Zach and Vooch are traded like during the same trade deadline. Like I'm not going to put it past them to do so. I'm not going to say the Bulls could never, but it's a stretch of the imagination for sure. Absolutely. Vooch is probably the main guy because if you don't cash in on his season right now,
he's just an expiring contract in the offseason. That's the
right.
You'll have.
Yeah, exactly. You might as well tell a team, look, you can get 2 playoffs out of him right now. And if he maintains this current production, this current efficiency for this year, you have a real guy right here, at least for this year. So like if the Bulls fail to trade Nikola Vucevic this trade deadline, that's also malpractice. Like again, they put themselves in the situation, Dan, where it's so difficult to see them succeed in many, many ways. Like hell, they even have a center who I think is ready to start ahead of Vooch if he's moved. Jalen Smith is right there. I would have no issue throwing him to the starting lineup.
That's both of them has been the idea of both of them has been pretty big for their offense, where you just have so many floor spacing minutes at the 5. Yep. I know Jalen Smith's percentages can rise and fall. I did want to ask too, and to his credit, I've been pretty hard on that trade, and I know a lot of Bulls fans have pushed back. They're like, look at the money Caruso got in his extension. He's injured right now, not shooting well. Josh Giddey's played a little better. Like the shooting inside the arc has ticked up. The Bulls are officially better for the season at both ends of the floor with him on the court. I do not think, maybe aside from ending possessions with a rebound, I still don't think he provides much value at all on the defensive end.
Oh, he does not. Those numbers are certainly cherry pick, or not cherry pick, but like they're highly influenced at the other people on the court with him. Yes.
I still just don't know that this, I will say it's not his ideal circumstance, but it might come pretty close when you're talking about the geography of how this offense is set up
right
in the half court. I still just don't see it with him. And I'm going to be so fascinated by how much they pay him again, I don't think he's been terrible. And my stance has just never been that he's one of the worst players in the NBA. I think he's just one of the most uniquely specific skill sets that doesn't do enough in his optimal role to justify tailoring your team to that uniquely specific skill set. You have to be on peak Zion Williamson healthy level to be that type of, when your skill set and position, whatever archetype is just so narrow.
I love that you pointed out Zion specifically, because I was going to make that comparison. Like some players are immensely talented, but they're just awful to build around. Like you cannot build something around them unless they're utterly elite at like 2 or 3 things. Josh Giddey has, here's the thing. People were saying, oh, he has elite court vision. Like I'm not there. Like he doesn't have, you know, Trae Young court vision. He doesn't have like that sense. He's a good passer. I'll go to my grave with, because that's absolutely true. He's a phenomenal rebounder. That's it. That is literally it. Like he can rebound, he can pass the ball. That's it. And you can't structure anything of substance around that. Like if the Bulls feel pressured because they made that deal to go into this offseason and say to Josh Giddey, look, here you go, $25 million a year. That is like, first and foremost, who are you negotiating against for him? I mean, like
restricted free agencies become non-existent for the most part. Like these teams are not tendering offer sheets. Yeah.
Right. I wouldn't even be interested in re-signing him if I'm the Bulls.
That's interesting. I mean, they do have depending on what he gets. When you look at how that Patrick Williams deal is aging at the moment, they would have some potential to have like two of the worst contracts. I guess some people still consider Zach LaVine's contract bad, but I like that's the other thing too, is just the Patrick Williams deal does not look any better. He definitely has a ton of defensive utility. His shooting from three since December 1st has been borderline atrocious, sub 32%. This team is tough because I guess
I'm going to have to eat crow, by the way, on the Patrick Williams thing, because over the summer, I was like, this contract is fine. Like he was age-wise, he was like trending toward, a couple of years ago, he was trending towards OG Anunoby territory. And I was like, you know what? I kind of buy it. Like he was sort of like the last resort on offense. I never like singled out DeMar for like taking away development touches necessarily, because I did think he was too passive. But there was a part of me who was thinking like, okay, when DeMar's gone, when he wasn't using all those possessions in the mid-range area, all right, that's going to open up shots for Patrick Williams. I'm not worried. Oh my God, do I have egg on my face? And I'm eating crow at the same time. What a sight that I am.
I don't even remember what we thought about the average annual value. We probably thought it could be neutral. Grant and myself were just flabbergasted that he got a player option. First of all, he couldn't even get a fifth year from anybody else. And why? I understand player options can have benefits because maybe they'll opt out and come at a lower number, but it was mind boggling. So to wrap it up on the Bulls, I have to ask you, we're talking in circles and we're confused and we've noticed things, we've made observations. Is there anything that you see this season that you can take away and nods to a semi-coherent or positive long-term trajectory for this team? Because I guess that's what still is. I don't understand what their intentions. Like, I'm looking at it this way. I'm not even trying to like say that what they're doing is right, but how are they viewing this team? And like, I don't even understand their perspective. Like, I just don't.
Oh, Dan, that's a mental exercise. Bulls fans have tried to understand for 4 years, and they are growing literally insane because of it, because no one sees it. Look, I've always prided myself on never saying I would do as good a job in a GM role, because I think that's lunacy. Every single GM in the NBA has forgotten more about basketball than I'll ever know. The Bulls are quickly becoming an exception for me and about 100 of my closest NBA friends. In terms of like people who cover the league, you would sleepwalk into doing a better job, Dan, in Chicago than Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley is doing right now. It's so egregiously put together from a front office perspective that I can't sit here and say, oh, what are the redeeming pieces? Like, you know how low I am right now? I'm looking at Matas Bucelas and Julian Phillips and going, well, they might be keepers. Those are the two people I can single out. Everyone else
is like, Talon Horton Tucker plays like Cristiano Felicio wants to dribble more. You know,
and he takes threes that looks like exactly like how Chuck took threes back in the day. Yeah. No, interesting player, but like,
oh no, I'm being completely facetious.
Okay, good. All right. But like, I don't see like, oh, Dalen Terry. Like, no, there's no one there where I'm like, yeah, untradeable or not untradeable, but like, yeah, this is a core piece. And that's why they should tear it all down. That's also why I think they should get control of their draft pick back, because
that's why. How else are you going to find that player? If he's not on the roster, you need to get it through the draft. And right now, even if you get to keep your pick, number 8 or 9, maybe that's fine in this draft, but like it's different than. But by the way, the real final thing is it too late? Just because if you're trying to get, top end lottery odds, they are off of a bottom 5 record. Like, I guess they have 21 losses and they're about 7 losses behind a bottom 5 record with, teams like the Jazz, the Nets, and the Wizards are determined to lose and they're going nowhere. And I assume at some point, if they're not there already, the Pelicans, the Raptors, the Hornets, these are all teams that have lost a bunch, but you don't necessarily know if that's their aim. One or two of those teams is going to feel the same way. They've already, and that might, by the way, that might contribute to why the Bulls don't do much, if anything, at the trade deadline is, well, how are we supposed to catch these teams that are worse than us already?
It's kind of wild, right? So imagine this. The Bulls are losers if they sit still. They're losers if they're buyers. They're only winners. Like, they're only winners if they have a fire sale.
And by the way, some people might not even consider them that, because are they going to move? Of all the players they're most likely to move, is there a chance none of them, like Kobe White would get you first round picks? I don't think they're going to move Kobe White, though. I think they should. I've been pretty clear about I think he's good, and that's why they should move them. This isn't a Kobe White his trade value is like, it was probably highest over the offseason, and it's just going to continue to get lower because of the time left on his deal. And as you mentioned, the 140% extension rules, they're probably not going to trade him. And so they don't have a single, like Zach LaVine. I would give up a first round pick for Zach LaVine.
I would too. Would the Bulls ask for it?
That might be where it's time to move on, is that the Bulls remain confusing as hell.
I mean, I will just say that in my Yahoo piece, where I also brought up the Bulls, I specifically typed out that you might be able to get away with less because these Bulls are just so god awful at negotiating. So like, and look, I didn't even say it as a joke. Like, there's historical precedence of this current front office being horrible negotiators. I think we have to bake it into our analysis. Like, if you're an NBA team out there who listens to the HardwoodKnocks, because obviously you should be, give them a call. Give the Bulls a call.
Throw something at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, like look, you have pretty decent odds. Like, you're at a bar at 4 a.m. in the morning, and you're a little drunk. That person at the end of the bar looks pretty good. That's where they are all the time. Just go try.
Well, actually, we're about to talk about what I think is one of the best Zach LaVine destinations in the league, and that's the Detroit Pistons.
Ooh.
Who they're pretty good. They are. You look at their vitals for the season, and it's okay. They're below average in offense and defense. They're 12th in offense since December 1st. They're 13-9 in the clutch. Cade Cunningham is amazing. People are still just going to point to the true shooting percentage and say this or that. Miss me with it. You want him to be more efficient as time goes on, but the shots that he's taking, the level of responsibility he shoulders on the offense, he drives everything for this team. And I think even just as a playmaker, he's improved I'm repeating myself from other podcasts. He's improved as a defender. He's improved as a rebounder. Yep. He's been fantastic. We've seen better play from the veterans since the Jaden Ivey injury. That's been big. Just the general setup of their offense. And there's a lot of iffy center play going around with them. Jalen Duren has his moments and also has his, I guess we'd call them non-moments. I don't really know.
Yeah, unfortunately so. I was expecting a little bit more out of him this year, but you know what? He's still super young, so let's give him time.
And Malik Beasley's been huge for them. Even we killed the Tim Hardaway Jr. transaction. I thought they pounced a little too early and giving up Quentin Grimes in the process. Same. Having him to space the floor, having Tobias Harris play better to space the floor, even match up against just some tougher defensive coverages. This is all to say, and this isn't news. Anyone who's listened to this or more, or I think, look, even some of the mainstream national podcasts are beginning to talk about the Pistons. That's how you know the Pistons are good. They are good. What is fascinating with them, Mort, is before we get into their pick that they owe to Minnesota and if they should do anything at the trade deadline, this roster specifically, knowing that Jaden Ivey isn't going to play this season, also kind of knowing the roles. I still love Asar Thompson, particularly on the defensive end, but knowing the somewhat muted roles that Asar Thompson and Ron Holland have. Mm-hmm. What is your view of this team this season as presently constructed as to how good they are, how good they could ultimately be?
I still think there's a ceiling. I mean, don't get me wrong. What we've seen over the past few weeks has been extremely encouraging. The fact that Kate has leveled up is the biggest takeaway for me. Like, I'm not even looking at them necessarily from with team lens right now. I think I'm looking at them more so through the Kate lens, because I think that was mission number one for them this year, was to try to figure out, what do we actually have in Cade Cunningham? Does he have the upside that we were anticipating picking him first back then? Because remember, his comp going into draft was like the American Luka Doncic. That was the idea. That was the expectation. Then he had the year where he only played 12 games. He came back the year after, played well, but a lot of people felt like he left something on the table. Now he's finally figuring it out. I think he's become a much better passer, much better like floor leader than I actually envisioned he would be at age 23. So loads of upside for him. Now trying to tailor that back to your question in terms of like the broader spectrum of the team, I do think there's a ceiling. I do think there's a ceiling. Like Jaden going out, huge loss. Like if you're going to have any sort of playoff aspirations and you make it to the playoffs, who is going to be your creators outside of Cade? Can you rely on Tim Hardaway Jr. to go in and create? Probably not. Not Tobias Harris either. Like Ron Holland is still, in my opinion, a year, maybe two away from being like that guy at the wing spot. There are a lot of questions still open for those guys. Like they've won a ton of games over the past couple of weeks. Is that a blip? Is that real? I think those conversations are real.
They've been pesky for pretty much the entire year. I'm more focused. We know what they need on offense. It's just, I think you could have made this case even with Jaden Ivey being a better fit for this team before his injury, is you need the other creator who can run things without Cade. And like, but you also want them to be able to play alongside Cade. So in the vein of Jaden Ivey, improving his away from the ball, like gravity, you want that from them as well. But I don't know how to feel about this team defensively. And I think that JB Bickerstaff, from what I've seen of the Pistons, has done a good job of maybe vacillating the approach where it's like, it feels like they go through these pockets of more aggression, but then there's going to be more conservative. But when you're looking at the personnel they're leaning on most, I don't know how to feel about them defensively or how you would go about. I think they could probably upgrade it, ironically, if they played some of the youngsters more in a Holland or in a Sora Thompson specifically. But I don't think you're going to do that without severely compromising an offense that has been ultra competent with Cade, who is like, we talk about veterans stepping up without Jaden Ivey. Cade on the season, 35 points per 100 without Jaden Ivey on the floor. Like, this is just, like, they have the hardest thing for the Pistons is already done. We have questions probably about everyone else on the roster, or you could have questions. The hardest part is done. Cade Cunningham is that dude. You could rank him how you feel about him, rest everyone else. The hardest part's set. They're pesky. I find myself, and this gets into the moves, like I want them. I'm not saying they give up a first round pick, but their pick is owed to Minnesota this year, top 13 protected. I'm a huge advocate for increasing your flexibility moving forward and being able to move on your feet a little bit more. And what if you get really good? You want to be unencumbered by that obligation. And we just talked about this with the Bulls. It's certainly the case with the Pistons, who are less likely to enter a mode where they shut down. The time to say, oh, like, no, this team could still get like ultra top lottery odds, but it's gone. So if you can buy without giving up future first round equity, that's where I'm at with them, is I think that they're that good. But they also could just be like, looking at where they are right now, I would be fairly surprised if they do nothing and get a top 6 spot in the East. But like as a top 8, like one of the better play-in teams, I think they could do nothing and that'll just be absolutely in play.
Yeah, fine. Yeah. No, I hear you on that. So what do you reckon right now? If like, what do you think internally they're thinking? Do you think they share your approach by basically saying, look, if we just make it to the playoffs, everything is gravy from there?
If they make it to the playoffs, that absolutely is the mindset. It might even be the play-in for them, because you mentioned this with the Hawks. Like sending the 12th pick to Minnesota or something. Like, well, you wouldn't send the 12th pick, but like if you just make the play-in, so then you're going to get your pick anyway if you wind up getting bounced from it in all likelihood. So I am curious what their thought process would be, but I don't even know, like, is what I outlined is what I think is their biggest need. Like, is that even right given the success that they're still continuing to have on offense? Or might they look at it as, we need kind of more bankable center player? Can someone blur the lines of both Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren together to do that? Those are probably the spots. Or I think you can even say, it's weird to say that they have so many needs, but they are kind of filled with placeholders and unproven players. Like getting someone who's more of a two-way wing than they ultimately have right now, because they don't have, do they have a two-way wing on the roster? Who's the closest that comes to meeting the two-way wing criteria for them?
Down the line, Ron Holland.
No, right now. That's what
right now. That, I mean, yeah.
Isn't that even more impressive? They're getting, I know you've seen like probably some better like defensive moments from certain guys, but like they're doing what they're doing right now
Right.
I would say with, I don't know if the word is dearth, but they're probably at just a two-way player deficit to players that are going to give you this at
Yeah.
both ends of the floor every single night is a net positive.
So why do you want to trade for Zach LaVine?
Well, could you get him? You might have to give up a young player to get him, which I guess is where it gets dicey. But like, you kind of have that when you look at Tim Hardaway Jr. So my big thing with them would be, if you're going to lean into the offense, let's get some more on-ball gravity there. And you're just not going to have that in Tim Hardaway Jr. You're not even going to have that in Tobias Harris. And so you throw Zach LaVine into the fold here. I guess the biggest criticism would be, I don't care about the money. Like, as long as you're not sending out future first-round picks, I don't care about the money. What does that mean for Jaden Ivey's future with this team if Zach LaVine is all of a sudden on it?
And that's why I probably wouldn't do it. I actually want to see this team stay on the timeline a little bit. I am also a little curious as to why they basically told Isaiah Stewart to stop taking threes. That's something I'm a little weirded out by, because I want to see them more spaced out offensively. And I think he was showing signs of becoming a pretty reliable three-point shooter. There are definitely some internal things I would change. I would go out and try to find guys that are a little closer to the timeline of Cade, because like I think their thought process from last year to this year, also when they underwent the entire management restructure, is we need more adults in the room. Okay, mission accomplished. You got Tobias Harris in there, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Simone Fontecchio was still there. So like, you have the adults in the room. That's great. But like you said, those are placeholders. You also have to like factor in, is now the time to remove those placeholders for like timeline pieces, or are you still a year away from doing that? Maybe if you take off the training wheels now, maybe that's too soon. Like, there's a balancing act here that I have a very hard time identifying as to when is the right time.
So you don't think that we know enough about them, or maybe even that they're dangerous enough as is to take that type of a more aggressive approach into the trade deadline?
Again, it depends on the player. Like, I will say as much, like you said, if you go out and get a guy, like, let's just bring up Zach LaVine again, because let's say you trade Tobias Harris and Tim Hardaway Jr. for him. You're not relinquishing draft capital. Zach LaVine is also 29, so you still get an adult in the room, like, on some level. I would do that. Yeah, sure, I would do that. Like, that's an aggressive move, and you get a substantial talent injection. That's never a bad thing. What I'm then wondering is, what's the next step? Like you said, because then, is he going to take over Jaden Ivey's? What is he going to take necessary shots away from Cade? Like, what's the plan?
Could something maybe in the middle of that be, okay, well, let's get a different type of or more consistent big man in here then? Like, if they, honestly, you know what they could do? I don't know if Portland would do it. They don't even need to send out money to take in Robert Williams III. Could you give up enough seconds for Portland to say, like, would that be an avenue they should go where, okay, you're not getting the 3-point shooting element out of your centers right now. Your half court defense over the past month plus in particular has been a mess. That is someone who can contain the ball if you need him to come out, but he can also, like, he's not huge, but he can do stuff around the basket. And then he gives you, I mean, I guess the way that they've used Isaiah Stewart this year, you could say that Robert Williams III, if he's fully healthy, which always a question.
I was about to say, I love the idea of Robert Williams for the 16 games.
Well, that's right. You're not sending out anybody. You're just kind of taking a flyer on him with seconds. Is that something that, or does that doesn't do it for you either? It's not like
Dan, I'm just gonna tell you how it is. That doesn't get me hard, baby, whatsoever.
I'm super intrigued by them. I just don't. I don't know that they have, even though statistically they have at points this season, I don't know how much of a higher defensive ceiling they're going to be able to carve out with this current group, unless they really, I don't want to say submarine, but definitely like ding like their offensive dynamics right now.
I wonder if they even worry about it. Like, I wonder if they are just taking the approach, like you said earlier, like basically if they just make it to the play-in, then they're fine. And then
I think it's fine. I'm just interpreting this as we're having the discussion of like, which of these teams is the most dangerous? Is there like Detroit winning out in this discussion relative to, and like those are teams that you need to figure out to be on the threat level of the Pacers, the Sixers type for the most part. And so you think
the Hawks
and the Hawks too. And it's, I mean, like, I don't know. There might be some more room between, I don't know what to talk about, but the Sixers, there might be some like real head and shoulders room between the Pistons and then peak Hawks and Pacers, but it's way closer than I ever would have thought it was.
Yeah. I think, sorry, just to wrap it up, like you said something in between, like the Zach LaVine thing, like someone a little less than that. I don't have a specific name in mind, but I do think, like, if you go into the trade deadline with a set of rules, you basically say, we absolutely refuse to give up draft capital whatsoever. Like, draft equity is off the freaking table. We'll trade player contracts, and that's it. If you can somehow find a small consolidation trade where you do bank on some type of talent injection, be that a wing, be that a guard, be that a big, I honestly do not care, because the injury to Jaden Ivey, that's why I'm opening up the guard spot as well. Yeah, I wouldn't hate that. I would only encourage them to do so as long as you are not removing draft picks from the equation, because this team could still struggle later on. I don't think just because they found the rhythm now, we have this tendency of watching the NBA and going, oh, this team is good now. That means they'll be good forever. Like, no, maybe not. They could go in and have a major lull later in the season. And that's just the rule that I would go into the trade deadline with if I'm the Pistons. Just everything is interesting, except for deals that involves us giving up draft equity.
I think I would even go one step further and say, because I agree with everything you're saying. I wouldn't give up draft equity. Even said that if you could get Zach LaVine without giving it up, I really might consider. I'm not going to lie. No, I would take it one step further and say, because they still need to care about the bigger picture, if you can use your cap space right now and even some of your contractual dynamics to take on money that's going to spill into next year, but it's attached to enough, either like something that's intriguing enough as a draft pick or even a prospect, you are still, the thing I wouldn't do as an example, if I'm not going to get a first round pick from Malik Beasley, who they're not going to have bird rights on this summer, so they're probably only going to be able to offer him the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. I'm holding on to him. So like portraying this team as sellers, I don't like. Yeah, no one on this roster aside from Cade is truly untouchable, but this is not a team that should go into the trade deadline looking to actively sell. But I also don't think that they need to prioritize this season specifically when they're looking at that cap space.
Fully agree.
Our next team is the Indiana Pacers. Lively bunch of late, which not coincidentally coincided with the return of Andrew Nembhard on December 1st. And before I even throw it to you, they have been, since he returned, 8th in points scored per possession, and more importantly, 9th in points allowed per possession, and equally important to that, 3rd in defensive rebounding rate. How are you feeling about these Indiana Pacers, with the quick caveat Tyrese Halliburton left their win over the Cleveland Cavaliers with a left hamstring strain, and that's the same hamstring that he's had problems with in the past, and as we're recording this, we don't have a prognosis
an update
how much time he will miss, if any.
I was actually going to talk about Tyrese Halliburton because, yes, one thing is that the winning streak coincided with the return of Andrew Nembhard. That's one thing. I would just like to read you the numbers prior to the game that Halliburton went out. The 5 games prior. 24.8 points per game, 10.8 assists, 2 steals, got to the line 5.2 times per game, 88.5% conversion rate, 48.7% from 3 on almost 8 attempts per game, 54.7% shooting overall. This is the Tyrese Halliburton we've been waiting on. He'd spent the vast majority of the start of the season being very mediocre, very passive, I want to say. I even wrote about over at Forbes when he's starting to string together a couple of games. And unfortunately for me, the timing was right, because then he started just keep playing like that. If it turns out that he's out for a while, and knock on wood that is not the case, that's a huge, huge loss. I mean, this is what was needed for them. If he plays like this, the 25-11, and last year before he started getting injured, it was 26-12. If he plays at that level, there's a reasonable argument to be had that he's in that, best traditional point guard in the NBA type of scenario. Because look, I will always go Luka in that regard, but he's not traditional. Luka is the exact opposite of traditional. So, but he is their main driver. Like we just talked about the Pistons, that they found their guy, Cade Cunningham. They found him. He's their guy moving forward. This is the Tyrese Halliburton that can push the Pacers into unknown territory in the playoffs. This is the Tyrese Halliburton that can have them go back to the Eastern Conference Finals, even though they were a low seed. This is the Tyrese Halliburton who can surprise everyone and get them I don't know, all the way to the finals, maybe, because he is such a driver. He is such a relentless force when he's on and his jump shot is on, that the trickle down effect of his game is so wild that he's probably one of the main guys in the Eastern Conference who just drives so much of his team's success. So everything you're going to ask me about the Pacers right now, I'm pretty much going to come it back to Tyrese Halliburton, because he is by far the engine that drives the show.
I would agree with you, but I think that the defensive uptick we've seen from them, and he's had better moments specifically away from the ball as a defender. And Caitlin Cooper, surprise, also did a fantastic breakdown over a basketball she wrote.
Look at my face. I'm so surprised that Caitlin Cooper said smart things.
Yeah, just transcendent analysis from her once again about how they're more just connective and versatile defensively. And again, I think Andrew Nemar has a lot to do with that. Being able to, if they're to sustain this, and just knowing they have a starting five that is slaughtering opponents on the season. And I think their net rating is actually higher on the season than it's been since December 1st when you filter out garbage. Right. I mean, regardless, they're, I think, plus 19.8 per 100 possessions with the starters on the court this season. That's a big deal. And I still struggle to see what their ceiling is within the Eastern Conference is currently constructed. I think of the teams we've talked about so far, they are the most likely to just stay inside the top 6 or even move up, maybe be in the, what are they? Aren't they like 4th as we're recording? Or they're within striking distance of, I mean, they have the same losses as the Magic. They're right there with the Bucks. They have that type of ceiling. I'm going to be curious too. And I owe Pacers fans an apology. It was very cool to see how many people pointed out that we were wrong within the first few hours of it going live, because it meant that people do listen to us. But I got the Pacers pick commitments wrong and had to remove it from the podcast we published over the weekend. Just a brain fart there. Is this a team that should be looking to do? And I mean, like, even one of the things that we would all have identified as their biggest need was, like, they need to, especially with the injuries to Isaiah Jackson, like the Achilles injuries, and James Wiseman. It was, they're going to need like a different backup big option. And we kind of laughed at the Thomas Bryant acquisition. It's not really funny anymore because he's playing well for them. And both him and Miles Turner, I think they've been put in better situations when you're watching them on defense. Opponents since December 1st are shooting under 55% at the rim against both of them. So it's not just like Turner being sort of shut down Turner. It's okay, Thomas Bryant, you're getting enough out of him there. Is this a team historically, even though the Pacers went out and got Siakam last year and then traded Buddy Hield, I would expect them to stand pat. But I'm also kind of wondering, because I think Jarris Walker has shown moments, a lot of the times offensively, but he's shown defensive moments. Bennedict Mathurin has shown defensive moments even when he's cooling off. I don't know how good of a fit either of those two still are long-term. Are those, you're not going to try, I would be shocked if they traded a 2027 conditional first-round pick. Do you look at using one of those guys plus more money to go and get like another just wing? It doesn't have to be someone who's cracking your closing lineup. Or do you look at this roster and say, motherfuckers, Aaron Nesmith hasn't played since November 1st. Like, we're just going to get our midseason acquisition from him, and we're just going to continue running. Like, they've been that good over a long enough stretch to where I think maybe, I don't know if they should, but they've certainly earned the right to say, like, we're not going to go out here and make any not even substantial, but just semi-material move.
Well, I'm tinkering with something.
Hashtag all-star. I've seen the push to get Tyrese Halliburton on there. I think he's been the most consistent pacer this year. And he has to get this version of him still. Like, when you also have Tyrese Halliburton playing like Tyrese Halliburton, that's huge for Indiana. We just hadn't mentioned him, so I needed to throw his name.
No, you should absolutely name Pascal Siakam, because he's worth it. I'm sitting here looking at the salaries, because that's the thing. You can talk about adding Bennedict Mathurin or Jarris Walker to a deal. I'm kind of toying with something larger. Like, if you combine their salaries, you're at 13.5. And if you add Toppin, that's probably 13. So what are we looking at? 13. That's
26 million. And they're not, whatever they do, they're not going to pay the tax, and they're within, I think, $200,000 of the tax. So it's going to be an even money or less trade.
Right. That for sure. But so that's why I'm trying to get the money up there. And it's not going to be a 3-for-1. That's never, like, the roster spots issues is a thing. So you're probably looking at a 3-for-2 deal. Question is, who? Like, what type of archetype should they kind of identify?
I've mentioned his name once or twice for them before, and you don't need all of those contracts that you listed. It might actually be harder because he's making so little.
Okay.
Let's get Haywood Highsmith to Indiana. Like that's the, like, what are the Heat going to do following the Jimmy Butler stuff sort of ending? And what does it take to get him though? Cause you're not giving up any of, like, you're not giving up a future first. You're not giving up Benedict Mather or Jarris Walker for Haywood Highsmith alone. That would be just another, maybe you want them to be bigger, but like just another like really feisty guy to come in on the perimeter and ensure that you have different variable combinations where maybe if you don't want to lean on Ben Shepherd too much, like, does that's just been another, you used the word feisty before, right? Like talk about feisty on defense. Ben Shepherd typifies that to a T. That could be an interesting name for them. I just don't know.
It's a sicko name. It's a sicko name. I get it. I kind of want to go juicier than that. I don't have a name, but I want to go a little juicier than that.
Jimmy Butler? How's that?
that is certainly juicy. I don't think that the contracts are going to get you there. That's the thing. Like we have to find someone who is, because I think with the way that Haliburton is playing right now, you can talk about timelines all day long, but he's like such a win now player because of the level of production. You can even say the same about a 21-year-old Victor Wembanyama, for example. Like when you're playing at that level, you're automatically a win now player. Benedict Mathurin, even though he's better this year, I think is still a couple years away from being, a winning player, a fully functional, influential player. I think he's a couple years away from that. Certainly you can say the same about Jarris Walker. I wouldn't hate the Pacers basically being buyers and saying, all right, let's accelerate the youth movement. I wouldn't mind that. But it has to be for the right piece. And I'm trying to identify what the right piece is. Haywood Highsmith was not the first name off the top of my dome, though.
Well, I guess I'm sort of resigned and reached the point, even though I've probably bandied about different thoughts to it. Like they are one of the teams where I have a great feel for what they've done lately, but I just feel like I need to continuously adjust my impressions of them more than a lot of these other teams. I'm kind of at the point where I'm resigned to I wouldn't have expected them to do anything big, but I also don't know that they need to at this. I mean, like the Aaron Nesmith of it all, like that's a really big absence to be navigating at this point.
Can I ask you about Miles Turner? Are you married to him in terms of the future?
No, I mean, he's going to be a free agent. This team has tax payroll concerns. And if you want to keep and pay Benedict Mathurin and Andrew Nembhard, whose extension will kick in, as well as Jarris Walker, that's like, there's only really one untouchable player on this roster. It's probably Tyrese Haliburton. And I think for where they're going, you add Siakam to that this season. But I like, how big of a swing do you want? I think it needs to come. Like, who would be the upgrade? What are you trying to upgrade the big man spot using Turner? Because if you move him, your center rotation is in shambles.
Yeah, no, I would try to upgrade the center position. That was my idea, but I'm also struggling to find a player. This is the thing. I feel like this trade deadline specifically is a little bit poorly tailored for the Pacers. I don't think there's like that name out there that makes a lot of sense. So I'm trying to come up with like something creative here, and I'm kind of failing because I just don't know which direction to go in here.
I think there are players who would work, but a lot of them are probably just too expensive to a point where I wouldn't advocate for the Pacers to go get them. And they're also not going to want to go get them or give up the level of equity that you need.
Right. Or they're perfectly salaried in a sense where you don't really know what kind of player you're going to get because they might be untested or whatever. It's, who would actually be fun. The Hawks would never trade him. DeAndre Hunter on this team would be fun.
Do you think he does enough defensively for them? He fit like a glove.
I don't think I care, Dan.
All right, there you go.
I honestly don't think I care.
They were mentioned, Grant, I thought it was a Cam Johnson team. He fits everywhere. Yeah. And I think you could point to, okay, that doesn't, like, we don't care about the defense there. I'm more so looking at, I don't want someone who's going to compromise their offense, but I would still prioritize maybe just like some real defensive size on the perimeter is what I look at this team and say that would, especially for the postseason, I think that's what they need. And I don't know that a Cam Johnson satisfies that.
I keep returning to my main point that I've also said on this show before, which is the team with the most points at the end of the game wins. Like you still need to put the ball in the basket, sir. And I think but we can talk about wing defense. We can talk about post defense all game long or all day long. We're in a game. So, but you need shot makers. You need someone to spread the floor. You need to optimize Tyrese Haliburton's offensive game first and foremost, and then you build from there.
I guess the issue there, though, is Cam Johnson, are you giving up a 2027 first? excuse me, a 2028 first. What is wrong with me? I keep getting their pick commitments wrong. I apologize, Pacers fans. It's just in my head now. But like, you're not giving up that distant first for Cam Johnson, I wouldn't think. And then I don't even know. That might be a deal where both teams say no, where it's okay. You're using Mathurin and Walker as the primary forms of compensation. The Nets
maybe not both.
No, what's that?
Maybe not both.
So you think one of them could? If one of them gets you Cam Johnson, I mean, I'd prefer it to be Mathurin at this point, just because I think that there's probably some redundancies and counterintuitiveness to how he plays relative to how the Pacers want to play. I'd be curious whether him alone is standalone value, especially given now you have to figure out the rest of the money from there, what that does. And I think that leads me to this. What's that?
Toppin?
I'm not, the Nets are not. I'd be shocked if they did Mathurin and Toppin for Cam Johnson. That would.
Yeah, Toppin has a lot of long term. But he's cheap though. Like the Nets, here's the thing: the Nets could take Toppin, right, sprinkle him with something, and then turn him into a first in about 6 months.
I mean, he's got 3 years left on his deal.
I know, but like the Nets have done it before. I wouldn't be shocked.
Would you think that? I mean, I would do that deal if I was Indiana. Would you still feel okay about there? Yeah, I mean, Cam Johnson could play both front court spots. Really, for them, they'd be fine. I just don't view that as. If that's the deal, I'm doing it. I just don't know if that, like, the more I think about this team, the more I'm like, I might just see what they have through at this, like, what happens when Nesmith comes back and what do they look like? And then if they need to, they can reorient over the offseason. I think that's where I'm at with the Pacers, because I know people have kind of viewed them as this paper tiger relative to how far they made it last season. They're substantially better than that. And I would say the biggest discrepancy, it feels like, is I don't know that many people outside of who are watching, like the Pacers fans and analysts, like Andrew Nembhard is so good and so important.
He really is. Yes.
On top of getting this version of Siakam and Halliburton, that's absolutely huge for the Pacers.
But he also presents an issue in terms of like his contract extension is going to kick in. So if you want to say, look, let's not worry about it, let's see what happens in the summer, where Miles Turner is going to be a free agent, you might be looking at, like the payroll goes up because of Nembhard. That also means you might have to sacrifice a guy. That's why I think there's a little bit of pressure to might get something done now as to not go into the season with an expiring contract.
What do you mean go into the season with an expiring contract because of?
Sorry, that probably was bad wording from my point of view. I want to optimize this team. Like maybe for the now, because like if you lose Miles Turner this summer, then you are going to get worse. You're looking at very few options to make upgrades because of the Andrew Nembhard's contract extension that's going to kick in. So maybe what I just want to do before this trade deadline is optimize the current situation to see how far, they can go. And then at least I can look myself in the mirror if I'm the Pacers and knowing going into the summer, we might lose Miles, but we gave it a turn. Like we gave it a shot. We went in for player X, like be that Cam Johnson or whoever, or Haywood Highsmith, who is going to optimize us. I don't think they can do nothing is kind of my takeaway here.
I would want them to do something, but with Miles Turner specifically, so who is the threat to take him in free? He's not taking mid-level money, right? And so the Nets, why are they signing Miles Turner? And then after that, it's a bunch of if the Spurs could get cap space if they do this. The Wizards might be able to do it if they do that. I guess what you're saying is, shouldn't they then be I'm actually, this is what I'm thinking you're saying, so correct me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. They should be more aggressive in looking to get off Toppin's money so that it emboldens them more to, I guess, pay what it takes to keep Turner.
Yeah, that's part of it. Like a consolidation trade. Maybe that's the better wording. Like I want them to consolidate contracts. If that means getting off the Toppin contract, like just turning that into something else. And if the cost of that is Mathurin or Jarris Walker, I'm probably okay with that.
Who says no if it's Mathurin and Obi Toppin for Kyle Kuzma? Is it the Pacers at this point?
That's actually interesting. Is it so? Kyle Kuzma and Pascal Siakam, is there not quite a bit of overlap there?
There's a ton of overlap. I actually would be interested to see what Kyle Kuzma looks like defensively on this team, though. And now that I'm saying it, if I'm talking about that, like, it should stay away. Like, if I'm trying to like get the Kyle Kuzma's like defensive utility to this team, if that's the primary reason to get him, I think he can be more plug and play on a good team than
Yeah,
we've seen.
no, I think so too. And again, I'm looking at this through the offensive perspective. So I love that you're taking the defensive approach. Kyle Kuzma could be fun if he's like plug and play ish, and he'll just say, "Okay, look, I'll take the three. I'll lock down the three. That's my position, and I'm just gonna take
Even
open threes."
I
And
will say, even I would prefer Cam Johnson to him, but I would be fairly surprised if the Nets did
right,
Mathurin and Toppin for Cam Johnson.
yeah,
But
it
I was gonna
depends
say
on
more.
how teams look at Mathurin though. Like you and I are probably a little lower on him than a lot of people, I would imagine. I
Probably
think,
Grant's even lower than I think the two of us.
yeah,
I actually think if you gave him more of a central role to the offense, I don't know if he's gonna have the level of playmaking to do it. But you need a team that doesn't need him to get off the ball or make decisions as quickly as the Pacers. And I say that
yeah,
even he's probably been better defensively and as a rebounder this year than I ever would have expected from him.
yeah. And yet I'm still not sold. We're 3 years in, and well, 2.5, and I'm
But
also with
this
you.
is so these are decisions you're willing to make, because I guess my moral of the story is like the Pacers, after kind of looking like they were like their window might have been ephemeral, they're back and they're good. I guess I'm more willing to kind of let it ride the way it is than you are, is where we're kind of different. Because the more of the
Oh
story
yeah,
is
no.
the Pacers
I'm
are
not
not.
wired that way, Dan.
Yeah.
I'm willing to make trades. I'm willing to tinker.
I guess I feel like I'm looking at this too closely as like, what are the Pacers actually going to do rather than what they should do, is probably what's going on
I
here.
think that is definitely our distinction here. Yes, I'm very much looking at it what they should do. If they look, but you might also be right. Like hell, again, assuming, and we're knocking on wood for the third time in this podcast, that Tyrese Halliburton is perfectly fine. And if he keeps up this level of 25-11, 25-12, whatever it is, like if he just keeps playing that brand of basketball, I honestly don't care if they make that big trade, because I think he is such a potent offensive system in and of itself.
All right. Well, that sounds like a good time to move on to this next team, which is, speaking of teams that are very difficult to figure out, that'd be the Miami Heat, who maybe when you listen to this, Jimmy Butler will either not be on the team or will be back with the team. Who the heck knows? Mort, how are we feeling about this team, which, mind you, despite everything, is above 500?
Right. Well, we have to talk about their situation, right? Not just the Jimmy Butler situation, but they have to make the playoffs. Like, because again, that draft pick is going to the 2026 draft pick is going to OKC unprotected if they don't. That is a major thing. So whatever they get back for Jimmy Butler has to make sense. It has to be a competitive return in whatever capacity. Does that mean that they should just stick with him and risk losing him? That I would lean towards either or. Like the one thing you can't do, and this seems very counterintuitive to when you usually trade guys, especially guys with the caliber of Jimmy Butler. I would not take a rebuilding package like for Jimmy Butler at this point because of the pick situation that they're in.
Right.
Because I suspect they could be really bad next year, and then they relinquish some high ass draft pick to the Thunder. I mean, good
And then
luck.
the Hornets 2 years after that.
Right, exactly. But like the Thunder especially, could you imagine? Could you just imagine the Thunder, like perhaps after winning a championship this season, then next year is like, oh, okay, we're gonna get like a top 3 draft pick. Like, god damn it, that will be that's almost unfair. So it like they have to think about self-preservation here, and I think that is all about making the playoffs. Like and again, it felt wrong coming out of my mouth saying do not accept a rebuilding package, because I do think that they're sort of there.
Mhm.
I wouldn't even close the door on a BAM trade, not now, but in the offseason, like if there are to like fully blow it up. But this year they just can't. They have to ride the wave. They have to try to win every possible game. That's also why I'm kind of weirded out that they suspended Jimmy. Like I understand the thought process behind it, but like I know he's upset. I know this and that, but
He's
like
upset.
at least well they are too. But like I know the situation. I'm just saying if you want to win games and try to avoid the bad thing happening, you probably need to have the best team on the floor. So it's a
I
weird
almost
time to
wonder,
be a
just
Heat fan.
because you could probably start like, I think it, if they just hold on to him,
Mhm.
do you think that he'll be a compliant enough camper for them to make, or at least hold the serve where they currently, like, they're no strangers to getting into the playoffs through the play-in, and he at that point could view it as he's trying to play to create a market in the summer, in the sense of the Nets. I mean, maybe they would sign him, but like you can't count on that where it's, a team will dump salary or give the Heat stuff to set up an opt-in and trade or something, or a sign and trade. Because I've kind of just considered, they can't keep him. But because of when Grant and I were talking about this draft pick situation last week or whatever it was,
right.
I don't know that because look, Tyler Hero's been great this year, changing his shot profile, driving a lot of the offense. Their offense is still in the 33rd percentile when he plays without Jimmy Butler. And when Jimmy Butler's on the court, and Jimmy Butler's been all over the place on offense this year. And this just shows you, I think, look, he's older, he's 35. There's like sort of the 2 games tattooed to memory before his suspension. Like they're in the 89th percentile of offense when Jimmy Butler's on the court, and they're winning minutes by 5.1 points per 100 possessions when he's on the court. And so
Jimmy Butler's good. That's something we have to remember in all of this. Yes.
But so it's just, what do they do here then? Or is it because I'm trying to even think of the teams that would be involved in the mix that could give them a package that could skew, if not win now, like win laterally. Like, does that make Beal then a more palatable option when you're dealing with Phoenix, especially if the Suns can go around and say, hey, we're going to get someone to give us a first-round pick for Ryan Dunn, and we will give you 2 first-round picks plus Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler? Because I really do. What's happening in Phoenix is not Bradley Beal's fault. I don't know who needs to hear this, but it's not specifically Bradley Beal's fault. If you put Bradley Beal on the Heat, I mean, I don't know what becomes of them defensively if you have to play him and Tyler Hero together, but him in a bigger role, that does that give you enough juice to kind of maintain where you are, or is that not really doing it for? Because look, the reason to not trade for Bradley Beal to me is the no trade clause. There's 2 years left on his deal. It's too much money, but it's 2 years. So after a season, he becomes this massive expiring chip, but it's the fact that he has control over where he's going. That's not a small thing. I want to make that clear, but I'm looking at it as the Heat, where it's just, you're kind of stuck in stasis for the next 2 years anyway, because you don't want to send these, let's say they convey this year's pick. You still owe a lottery protected pick in 2027. You want to be kind of good then, because if you don't convey it, it does become unprotected in 2028 still.
I see your Bradley Beal scenario, and I raise you a challenge trade of Jimmy Butler for Zach LaVine.
The Bulls want to put Jimmy Butler on the
look. It's the Chicago Bulls. It's a former Bull that comes home. You already have the tagline, ready. Look who's back. The number 21 jersey. This is the Bulls are a PR team. They're not a basketball team. It's all about PR. That's who they are.
So I'll say this. We could get into a bunch of different scenarios. I really don't see one where the Heat move Jimmy Butler and are even remotely as dangerous as they might be with him. And do you think that, given the nature of the free agency market, the lack of cap space out there, that they could even themselves think he's not going to check out on the court completely? Maybe I'm just wrong here, but maybe they view it this way. He's not going to check out on the court completely, and they'll figure it out over the summer in hopes of conveying this pick. And maybe he opts in and they move him that way, or it's a sign and trade. Am I wrong to think that that's becoming increasingly likely? If the Heat, if they don't care about these pick protections, then it's a whole different conversation, but you have to care about these pick protections.
Oh, of course you do. And that's why I think they're being cautious, as they should be. I would be surprised if they took that approach, because I think it's risky. And I don't necessarily think Pat Riley is in that mindset. I do think LaVine is, just to wrap up that one, is at least a guy who gets you into his type of vicinity of being more dangerous. Not that he gives you the all-around presence of Jimmy. Obviously he doesn't, but at least you're getting a significant talent in return who can help you maintain that draft, or not get you into the playoffs, so you make sure to not relinquish an unprotected. And again, that is my entire priority here.
You would just be perpetuating the Zach LaVine narrative by doing that, though, because he's then going to be on a team that's mediocre and everyone's going to blame him for it.
That'd be bad. Well, you know what? He does have Bam. He's never had, a center that's that good defensively or that good of a playmaker as well. I want to see that.
That's also what's tough about this team, though, is as good as Bam is or might be, you still can't use him as your just offensive fulcrum and expect to win minutes against really good lineups.
And it's probably where I'm at that point where, with the Heat, I just want them to win this year as to avoid relinquishing that draft pick, and then they can sort of blow it to pieces in the summer, I'm fine with that. But again, then the other draft pick scenario comes in return. This team is just in so much trouble.
They are, but they also might look, I mean, and this would probably lend more merit to your stance. They might just look at the way that Jaime Jaquez Jr. has been playing lately. He's been like really good. Like teams really seem to just kind of figure out what he was trying to do offensively. And it's like, oh, he's going to make threes now. And like they're getting good minutes from Hayward Highsmith. Tyler Hero has just been really great this season. Terry Rozier, that is going to go down as unless there's a big turnaround here. I don't even know why they're playing him at this point. That's how bad that he's been for them. So I do agree with you that they're in trouble, but they might look upon themselves and say, like, we just need, like, maybe it's breaking up Jimmy Butler into a couple of small. That's why I keep coming back to Sacramento, where if like the bones of it were DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Huerter. I mentioned this now 3 or 4 times. King fans seem vehemently against it, and I understand why. But I also don't, aside from Beal and aside from just the Kings in theory, who, by the way, the Kings are playing really well under Doug Christie for the most part. So they might not be looking to shake things up to that degree. Hitting the play on Keon. Hit the play Keon Ellis button works. Who knew? But like, what is the other team? You mentioned Zach LaVine, but like that feels like, well, then now there's going to be a third team in there. Like, is Bradley Beal somehow going to Chicago? I just don't see Jimmy Butler going back to the Bulls. There's not a lot of teams.
I mean, he does have a choice. If he's traded, he's traded. The Bulls would probably do it because then here's the thing. If he leaves in the summer, the Bulls are just off the LaVine deal. Then they just shorten everything and they save money. Look, again,
but is that that might be the most realistic scenario? Like, who's more likely? Because we know the Suns would make that deal, but it becomes are the Heat more likely to take on Beal or the Heat more likely to take on Zach LaVine? The answer
it has to be LaVine at this point.
He's younger, he's better, and moral. He also doesn't have a no trade clause. That's like what matters.
Right. That factors in absolutely. But like, look, if that's a deal that's on the table, I'm not saying it is. That's just me coming up with nonsense. But
would you do this as a, he's going to be a rental for the most part? Like,
if I'm the Bull?
No. I was going to say, like, the Pistons have $14 million in cap space. Like, if it's Tim Hardaway Jr., your cap space, what are we at there? Like 29 million. And then would you give up? Like, would the Heat take Tobias Harris? Like, do you just do that and just see what happens?
Oh my God, that is dreadful. No, I would not. I would not do that. I would not do that. Like, again, the see what happens bit, like, that it's funny because you and I, sometimes you'll attack a team, just kind of safeguarding yourself a whole bit. And then sometimes you'll just go balls to the walls. And we often like take different approaches because I will do the same things on certain teams. Like for the Heat specifically, and because of this draft pick situation, I'm like the most cautious dude. I'm being the most cautious that I can ever be because I don't want to go into this trade deadline, move Jimmy for something that might be trash, and then end up having to fork over an unprotected pick in 2026.
You would be saving. The Pistons have the ability to save you money right now.
Right.
So you're cutting your tax bill.
Yeah.
Tim Hardaway Jr. comes off the books. Tobias Harris has only a year left and about roughly half of what you're going to pay Jimmy Butler.
Do they help you right now? Which is the question.
No.
Right.
Well, I mean, like, no, but that's what I don't understand. I would say if the Heat wind up trading Jimmy Butler, I would be shocked if they convey their pick this year.
I mean, I just need Jimmy and Tobias Harris on the same team because then they're going to have that inevitable discussion of when Jimmy told the Sixers, you chose Tobias Harris over me. I need that. I need all the drama.
By the way, the Pistons could do that if they were willing to, knowing again that if you view Jimmy Butler as a rental, if you just said, hey, here's Isaiah Stewart and Tim Hardaway Jr., that works. You could just, I don't know what you're doing, your big man rotation at that point. Are you signing someone off the scrap heap? And Jimmy, like, he might compromise your spacing. When we're talking about with Jaden Ivey out, especially, like, imagine Jimmy Butler works alongside Cade, and then imagine Jimmy Butler in the non-Cade minutes.
Yeah.
And we're worried about their defense. If they ever play Ausar Thompson and Jimmy Butler together, good luck.
How many practices until he makes Jalen Duren cry?
Well, probably halfway through the first one.
Right.
And the concern there is you don't want to like derail development or vibes just for like, we have it. Like, what is Jimmy? Is he going to be a happy camper if he's there? I mean, maybe he would be because you don't want to become the James Harden where there's only one team that's willing to pay you type deal. So, I mean, if I were the Pistons, if it's Tobias Harris and Tim Hardaway Jr., I'd just do it. I understand why the Heat would. Now, if it's Isaiah Stewart and Tim Hardaway Jr. and on the Pistons, maybe there's seconds involved. I might have to think about it. You could probably still talk me into doing it but I, this is where I'm at with the Heat is I'm having a tough time evaluating them because I'm so impressed by some of the things they've done, even by the way that Jaime Jaquez has been playing. I just don't see that. Like, I don't know what the return is on a Jimmy Butler trade, or even if you told him to take his ball and go home and just not be with the team for the rest of the year. I'm almost warming up to the idea that if you want the pick to convey, you might just need to ride this out.
Look, and again, this goes back to your point. Like, you're asking, could there be a scenario wherein Jimmy just kind of accepts, all right, look, let's just wait it out until the summer. If that happens, I fully agree with you. Like if Jimmy and Pat just has this kumbaya moment for like just to agree to play nice for the next 6 months, sure. That might be the best possible solution for all parties involved. Does Jimmy Butler, despite being 35, have that level of maturity? I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't even know what some people suggested. Like, could Denver do it? And like that's all sorts of complicated because like, even if they're going to include a conditional 2031 pick, the Heat are going to have to take on Zeke Naji, and then it's Michael Porter Jr. because Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon can't be traded. And if you're looking at a Heat team with, again, you have to go through more specific framework, but if you're the Heat, and maybe you could even get like a Julian Strother out of that. I don't think they're going to include Peyton Watson or Christian Brown for Jimmy Butler. I'd be pretty shocked.
Man, I'm not even that high on the trade return. I feel like you and I, we're evaluating Jimmy differently. I just think there's so many things going against him right now that I wouldn't even consider adding Julian Strother. I have a hard time even relinquishing first rounders.
You're sitting here then telling me that they shouldn't accept all these packages for him. So isn't the moral of the story then that they should just keep him and figure this out over the summer? I think they wind up moving him, to be clear, but I agree that his trade value, I'm higher on his value, or I don't think he has a ton of leverage, but I think Jimmy Butler is still an all NBA caliber player, even though I wouldn't put him on an all NBA team this season for some obvious reasons. But then like, what deal are the Heat, if his value is at an all-time low and you're trying to get a return that can keep you in the playoff hunt, what is the return then?
So the one I came up with when I wrote my article over at Yahoo, I'm going to spoil it. God damn it, Dan. That was,
go click on it. That
that was Jimmy, Alec Burks for Keldon Johnson, Zach Collins, and Trey Jones.
Why are the Heat doing that?
Look, I wrote this exclusively off the prism of we want to preserve, our flexibility in terms of the draft pick. Keldon Johnson, Zach Collins, Trey Jones at least keeps you somewhat competitive. And look, like I also outlined in the piece, if there are better offers out there, for sure, go grab it. But look at all the factors that are playing against the Heat here in this one. Jimmy's age, first and foremost. The secondarily, all the circus around him, yet again, that is going to turn a lot of teams off. The fact that you don't really know if he's a rental or not because of the player option. So, like, his trade value is not, in my opinion, where it would have been without all those items. Could the Heat get better than the trade that I suggested? Maybe. Maybe not. Again, whenever we talk about Jimmy in a broader sense, everything we read is Jimmy Butler's value is not particularly high. That has come from several sources over the course of several days, even weeks now. And so I'm trying to gauge it in a way where, okay, if let's say the Heat get Zach Collins, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones, right?
I think I guess if you replace the Terry Rozier minutes with Trey Jones minutes.
And Keldon is still Keldon's contract. Like, I know Keldon is
he's fine. He's
fine. But like, he's better than his contract. You can flip that. You can even rehab his value. He might actually even benefit from going to Miami. I think they're a little bit more physically driven than the Spurs are. So I think his playing style would work there more than it does in San Antonio. Zach Collins is better than what he's played this year. Like, he's just been a sacrificial lamb for the Spurs finally realizing, oh yeah, Wemby's a center and he should not play with the center. So Zach Collins has been playing mob-up duty. And then when he comes in, he's obviously not Wemby, and that contrast is pretty stark. He's a good player. I actually like Zach Collins. I think if a team trades for him under the radar, he could have a resurgence elsewhere. Like, again, there are a lot of ifs here, and I fully concede that for Heat fans, they're like, oh my God, I'm going to revisit my lunch on this one. Fair. That's totally fair. But what deals are realistically out there? Like, again, if the Zach LaVine deal is there, yeah, I go that one too. Like, obviously, I go for the higher upside, the higher production level. I just have no freaking clue as to what is legitimately available for Jimmy Butler out there.
Right. And I don't disagree with you on that. I'm not even saying that trade is bad, knowing what we know about Jimmy Butler, his lack of leverage. I just don't, if we're looking at everything through, can they convey this pick?
Right.
You've yet to outlay an alternative. I don't, of all the ones you mentioned, I think probably Zach LaVine would give them the best chance of like, but I also like the appeal of, you did this with the Spurs trade. If you dealt with the Kings, maybe they like DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Huerter, turning Jimmy Butler into
I like that one too.
2 or 3 rotation players. There's appeal there. I mean, is there something to be done with if they were willing to take on, it'd have to be like a mega trade, but you take on, I guess, the extra year of CJ McCollum and then trade Brandon Ingram as well? Is there something to just like, does New Orleans say, well, we're getting off of CJ McCollum's money, let's bring Jimmy Butler in here for but then you're ruining your tank this year because Jimmy Butler's going to help you win games. So that's probably not the way to go.
Well, I mean, is he though? It's the Pelicans and they're grotesquely bad. Like, does he even have time to turn that ship around?
No, there's no, like, the Pelican season is over. It's
right,
done.
Exactly.
And so you don't want to put yourself in Bulls territory where you're not.
Right.
They're 8-32 as we record this. And so they are, how many losses outside of a play-in spot? Let's even see. They're 13 losses outside the play-in tournament. It's over. It's done.
It's done. So
if they were thinking, if he was willing to go there and get paid, that might be somewhat interesting. But I don't.
Yeah. But I think, to your point, I would agree with you that the best alternative here is to have a Jimmy Butler, Pat Riley makeup session where they just kind of say, okay, for the rest of the season, let's just play niceys. That you're absolutely, because Jimmy Butler is the best talent, outgoing talent in any of these trades. He just is. So if the Heat want to avoid the draft pick scenario, yes, that would be the primary one.
Let's talk about another team, the Philadelphia 76ers, who many did not peg as a fringe playoff team. We also talked about them with the contenders. What are we supposed to say here other than, do you still view them as we're recording this, they are outside of the play, so they're 11th place in the East. Now, again, that also just means that they're 4 losses out of a home court advantage spot. They have decidedly won the minutes that the big three have played. Paul George is playing better of late, but the big three have played 404 possessions together, Mort. They are also just a barely net positive. This is per PBP stats when they have 2 of their big three on the court. They're outscoring opponents by like 0.32 points per 100 possessions during their 2-star lineup. So any sort of at least 2 of their star. That's including the big 3 minutes. You've gotten some better shooting performances of late from some, including Paul George, who is still, I think he's at like sub 32% on open and wide open, semi-open and wide open threes for the season. But he's still like, I think he's showing some shot creation juice. The defense has been pretty good this year. They're even above average when going up against top 10 offenses. The Sixers, to me, are just all over the place. They have trade assets. They have outgoing money. You can just lean on, well, Joel Embiid has to be healthier at some point, right? We know Jared McCain is now done for the year. You've gotten a lot of run out of Gershon Yabusele, who has been, again, unplanned, your best, most consistent backup big, or your best, most available, consistent big in general. What do we make of these Philadelphia 76ers, Mort?
You mean the Philadelphia 76ers?
Oh yeah, there's a typo up there. What's up?
I love it because that is so fitting. That is the perfect symptom of this season from the Philadelphia 76ers. That I have no faith in this team whatsoever. Like, even if they, like, again, I've reached that point, and I've said this on this show as well, with Joel Embiid. I am at that point with him where I just cannot rely on him at any point anymore, especially in the playoffs. And that is what they were built for, playoff success. That was their whole spiel. That was their whole thing. So I think it's so perfect that there's a typo in there, because this is the season from health. And that is, this season has been a typo for them. Paul George is only going to get older. He is going to get less effective as he ages, because he's also been an injury wreck for years and years and years. Tyrese Maxey felt the struggle of being, the number one guy. He went down as well because he was just overburdened, overtaxed, whatever. And that is probably going to be a symptom as well moving forward if guys aren't going to step up. Jared McCain is out for the rest of the year. That's not great. I mean, I'm not afraid of this team, regardless of whoever, like of every team we talked about today. if I'm leading one of those teams, I'm looking at Philly. I'm like, no, not worried.
Yeah, the fact that you would say you don't think they could be the most dangerous of the East Fringe playoff teams is a pretty big indictment
Yeah.
with them, because they should be. I mean, first of all,
Yes, they
you
should.
don't want them to be a fringe playoff team based off what they, you sign Paul George, you extend Joel Embiid, you give Tyrese Maxey his money, Jared McCain being a nice find. Is there any way you would feel better about this team? And so I think you're looking at it and you could say, I think you've gotten like better offensive performances than you were getting from Caleb Martin to start the year.
Yep.
Caleb Jr. has been a little all over the place, but you still know what you have in him. Like, is there anything it's always going to come back to the health. But so if you're them, do you look at these assets that you've stockpiled and you have some tradable salaries? Are you now less likely to make any sort of move because of, I mean, the longer term picture was always going to be fuzzy with them, but now
Right.
the short term picture is muddied.
Well, I mean, look, I think they have one or two ways to go here. One, they can just realize, oh my God, this did not work. We have to start over from scratch, and that's it. Or they can double down and say, look, let's add to our current pieces. Let's keep buying. And that would be probably the most logical approach, because you want to maintain Joel Embiid in a Philadelphia 76ers uniform. Like, let's be real. That's probably one of your main prerogatives. You want to keep Tyrese Maxey around. You want to, I guess, keep Paul George around, at least for now, because what kind of value do you get if you shop him? You're not going to get a player better than him, especially at that salary.
I thought about a Paul George for Jimmy Butler, figure it out, like the rest of the framework challenge trade, but I don't know why Miami would want to take on the Paul George deal, but not pay Jimmy Butler over a shorter term. So
is Paul George arguably, like, where does that rank in terms of like contract quality around the league, do you think?
Not high, probably still above.
Right.
I'd probably trust him. Do you trust him more than the Jamal Murray contract that'll kick in after this year?
Oh,
Jamal Murray's been playing better of late, to be fair.
That is so depressing, because I actually agree that there's like, that's a conversation. That's a real conversation. Jamal Murray, man, side note, I really hope to see him get back to form. Like, I know he's played better of late, but yeah, because again, Paul George, I think his contract is right up there among some of the worst. I don't think that's going to be easy to pivot off of any way, shape, or form. And if it's not, that sort of kind of negates the whole, hey, let's take an approach of rebuilding, starting over. I know our mutual good friend Brian, he's been in my DMs as well all the time. Like, maybe they'll get a good trade for PG before the trade deadline. Good luck, buddy.
I wonder what team would they take Bradley Beal back? Would the Suns consider doing that? They probably would. I mean, the Suns anyway. I don't know if the Sixers would be. Okay, Bradley Beal on a no trade clause, but we only have him for 2 more years, only to get out from the final year of Paul George's deal. Right. I guess you're getting the Suns pick. What you think about it?
Yeah. Okay, I'll think about that one at least, because I mean, yeah, it'd be a small backcourt, but I don't even care, because that could theoretically be so offensively potent, especially when you have Jared McCain coming back from injury next year. So you run this 3-guard lineup of McCain, Maxey, Beal. That's got some juice.
I don't know. This team is all sorts of all these teams are kind of. I feel like we have the one more team to talk about quickly after this, but. Or do we? Is this the last one? Is this team number 6? Oh, yeah, it is. We're on the last one. Shout out to us. But taking a 2-hour podcast, talk about 6 teams. They should be, if we're just asking in a vacuum, right. Okay, these teams get to the play-in, which is what you're talking about for a lot of them. I don't even, because the thing with Philly is we could sit here and say all these things. Maybe they don't make any move. They just stand pat. If you just catch lightning in a bottle for any of these teams, doesn't Philly by default have the highest ceiling in the postseason then? Like, if you catch where Paul George and Joel Embiid are healthy, if they just get to the play-in, isn't that somewhat terrifying? Or no?
Yes, of course. But like, you're prefacing this by saying lightning in a bottle. You're basically presenting a Hollywood script. Like, basically say, all right, we have to do the impossible. Then isn't it obvious? Yeah, sure it is. But like, how likely is it for this team to catch lightning in a bottle? I mean, honestly, like, that's the thing. Like, right. I also think I've just been beaten down by history on this team. I think that's part of it. Like, I am very affected, biased, whatever you want to call it in that regard. Like, I just, whenever this team has looked good, they've looked ready, we're looking at them and going, oh, this might be the year. big fella goes down, something else happens, like he breaks his face for the 65th time, like something happens. And unfortunately for Embiid, it's almost always outside of his control. So it's like, it's really tough. Eventually, I think they're going to have that moment where they have to look themselves in the mirror and figure out, like, what the hell is our project even at this point? Like, what are we trying to achieve? Is that moment now? Probably not. But I wouldn't at least go and double down and go in and make like a proactive move. Like the Beal thing is good though, because I don't think that's like doubling down. I think you're just sort of trading one issue from not for another issue, but like you get a guy in who can sort of mimic some of that production. Like it's fine. I wonder when they'll realize it's time to hit the big red reset button. I wonder when that time is.
I'd be shocked if it comes before the 26 offseason.
Yeah. Yeah. One more year. That feels kind of right. Yeah.
So of all these teams, we talk about Atlanta, we talked about Chicago, Detroit, Miami, Philadelphia. What is the team I missed? What's the one that I'm forgetting? Oh, Indiana. Of all those teams, who do you view as the most dangerous this season? And it could be, I'm not even saying like maybe should be the most, like if some of these teams make changes. Right. I think most of them, with the exception of the Bulls, you could make a case that they have an incentive to be buyers at the trade deadline, or at least opportunistic buyers at the trade deadline. What do you view as just, one of these teams that we mentioned is going to finish in the top 6?
Yes. I mean, look, it depends on what they do, right? If we just,
well, you have to balance all that with the motivation and the likelihood with how good they currently are. Would you like my answer?
I would, because I think we're going to go in different directions.
This is, and it's coming about, I think like a month after I said I was out on them, or maybe I think it was before December I said it. I think it's Indiana.
We're okay. Same.
I think they could do nothing. If you told me all these teams do nothing, so even the Heat still have Jimmy Butler, I will feel the most confident in the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah, same.
If you say that all these teams or some of these teams will do something, I think you can make the case that even if the Pacers do nothing, you still feel better about them than the teams that do something. Because what is the scale of a move that Miami or Detroit or Chicago specifically is going to make? Even Atlanta, some of those teams are going to, one of those teams is probably going to sell. I think the other of those teams, Detroit and Atlanta, will probably play conservatively. It seems honestly, of all these teams, the most likely to try and take a swing would be Philly, because they might view it as a necessity. But if you told me Indiana did something, I think they need to do the smallest level of something for you to feel exponentially better about their team than you do right now. Whereas I don't even know, maybe Detroit comes a second, because with Philly, it's because it always is going to come back to Embiid. You can't do anything, I don't think, that is just going to make you feel not measurably, but exponentially, to use that word again, to feel just worlds better about their present season chances of making noise in the Eastern Conference. Because no matter who they get within reason, it's still going to come down to how healthy is Joel Embiid specifically, and what does healthy Joel Embiid look like.
So I agree with the Pacers. I will say this: if Miami has that kumbaya moment between Jimmy and Pat, if that's a thing, if that they just put aside their differences, they go in and Jimmy Butler plays, the best version of Jimmy Butler basketball for the next half season, I think they leapfrog Detroit. I think they're above Detroit, because I do think a motivated Jimmy Butler, and with Bam there, as good as he is, and Tyler Hero, like that trio is just a little too enticing for me to go with Detroit over Miami.
I would agree with you too. And I think also Detroit has one of the 5 toughest schedules remaining. 3 matchups against the Cavs, both of their matchups against the Thunder. They only have to play the Celtics one more time, so that's a vote in their favor. Whereas with Miami, they're about middle of the road. They're 17th. I'm looking at theirs now, their strength of schedule. So, I mean, they have Boston 3 times, the Knicks twice, the Cavs twice. That's a lot. But I think I don't think that's spicy. If you were getting into the number, I think honestly, what should be a hot take is not the fact that we're just like, could Detroit, do you feel better about them than the Sixers? In theory, you shouldn't, because at some point we have to gravitate towards just the top end outcomes of nothing happening. And Philly still has that going for them. But man, this is like the lack of feel group in the Eastern Conference. And I honestly probably have the strongest feel for what I think Detroit and Atlanta are. And that's just a weird thing to say.
I will say this though, with the Pistons, one of the reasons that I hesitate is also they won 30% of all their wins in the past 14 days on the season. So, I don't want to say we're crowning them too quickly, but I do think we're sipping the Kool-Aid. That's fine. We should all sip the Kool-Aid once in a while. But it's been 14 days of this caliber of play, I want to say. That's a sample size that's still just a smidge too small for me to get fully excited.
I mean, if push comes to shove, they're probably fourth in my if I'm ranking these teams in terms of being immediate threats this season. Okay. I would have Indiana. I'm probably going to put Philly too, to be honest with you, because the Jimmy Butler thing with Miami, I'll probably put them 3, but I don't think either of us convinced myself that you're going to trade Jimmy Butler and be even comparatively off. Right. But if you keep Jimmy Butler, there's a chance that you could maybe be really good. And then I'd probably put, I don't know, would I put the Hawks ahead of the Pistons? I think the Pistons feel like they've carved out more of an enviable path than they had before. Yeah. And it's bolstered by, okay, they're competent, and maybe we're overrating the competence, but that's for them, it's not about this season. For them in Chicago, more than any other team, whether Chicago feels that way or not is a different story. But for them, even more than any other team, because they have their primary building block in place, it's not about this season. And so if we were ranking futures, I mean, maybe Indiana could be in front of Detroit, but Detroit's at the top of this. Maybe Atlanta's there, but that's a different discussion. So in terms of immediate, I think I'm going Pacers, Sixers. Honestly, I'm going Pacers, Sixers, Hawks, Pistons, Heat, Bulls. The Heat are they're in such a weird position that even if you keep Jimmy Butler, which might be the better here and now route to go down, because I don't know what Jimmy Butler's going to do.
Yeah, I don't think I have a ranking, but you and I do agree on the first and the last one.
Shout out to Chicago.
Shout out to the Bulls for at least being consistent. No, and again, this, you know what, this exercise also underlines just how excited I am for the second half of the season through the perspective of the Eastern Conference. Because we have no idea what's going to happen here. It's such a weird conference to get smart about. I don't think there are any breadcrumbs that is telling us what's going to happen. This is just a complete wild west, and it's only going to get even wilder by a trade deadline. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing, which team, because someone will break off of this group and just shove our words right back down our throats. That's going to happen. It's just going to be a question of who.
Mort, unless you have anything else to add, are you able to tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you do?
Yes. So I am at Blue Sky at msjnba.bsky.social. I think it's the URL.
I mean, you don't need to punch that on Blue Sky. It's still MSJ NBA.
Right. MSJ NBA. Okay, cool. Yeah. On Blue Sky. I'm not really over at the Bad Place anymore because I don't think it's fun. But yeah, you can find my work over at Yahoo, over at Forbes, at Sports Illustrated, specifically at Draft Digest. I do the NBA podcast, usually with you for the most part. You and I we've begun dating quite a bit now, every single month, at least a couple of times. So that's fun.
We're up to 3 times a month.
Yeah.
That's consistency.
That is consistency. Yeah, for sure.
But please go follow Mort, all the great work that he does, and shout out to anyone listening to this on the NBA podcast feed as well. Mort does a ton of terrific work there. Until next time, and as always, I speak for Mort when I say shout out to the one, the only, the indelible, the one who can actually swing the championship race when he invariably comes back to the NBA this season, Mr. Frank Ntilikina.